In the blazing heat of 1187, the Crusader kingdoms, a Christian foothold in the Holy Land for nearly a century, found themselves on the brink of disaster. A new, formidable power had emerged from the sands of the East. This was Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, a man who had forged a unified Muslim empire and now stood ready to challenge the foreign invaders. For years, a tense and fragile peace had held, a delicate truce between two worlds. But this peace was about to be shattered, not by kings or sultans, but by the reckless ambition of a single man, Reynald of Chatillon. He was a rogue baron, a law unto himself, who saw treaties as mere suggestions. His repeated brazen attacks on peaceful Muslim caravans were a constant provocation. But when he went a step further, threatening the holy cities of Mecca and Medina themselves, he crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. For Saladin, this was the ultimate sacrilege, a personal and profound insult. He made a solemn oath before his entire court. He would kill Reynald with his own hands. This was no empty threat. Saladin began to gather his forces, mustering the largest and most disciplined Muslim army the Crusaders had ever faced. His target? The Crusader city of Tiberias, located on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. He laid siege to it, a deliberate and calculated move. Tiberias was not just a city, it was the personal fiefdom of the wife of Raymond of Tripoli, one of the most powerful Crusader lords. It was a lure, a perfectly crafted piece of bait. And with the fate of a Christian city hanging in the balance, King Guy of Lusignan, the ruler of Jerusalem, and his entire army took it. King Guy of Lusignan now faced an agonizing, impossible choice. The fate of his kingdom rested on his shoulders. On one hand, he could march to relieve the siege of Tiberias. This meant leading his entire army across the parched, waterless hills of Galilee in the height of summer. It was a perilous gamble. On the other hand, he could remain at his well-supplied, well-watered camp at Sephoria, preserving his army as strength, but abandoning Tiberias to its fate and suffering a catastrophic blow to his honor and authority as king. The more cautious and experienced nobles, like Raymond of Tripoli, whose own wife was trapped in the city, pleaded with the king to stay put. They knew the land, they knew the heat, and they knew Saladin was laying a trap. But Guy was a king who ruled by consensus, and he was surrounded by hot-headed, arrogant knights, chief among them the grand masters of the military orders, and the infamous Reynald himself. They taunted him, calling him a coward, arguing that to not march was unthinkable for a Christian king. Pressured, belittled, and desperate to prove his mettle, King Guy made his fateful decision. He chose to march. The moment the last Crusader soldier left the life-giving springs of Sephoria, Saladin's masterfully designed trap began to close. His forces didn't engage in a full-on battle. Instead, his highly mobile Turkish and Saracen horse archers descended like swarms of angry hornets. They galloped in, unleashed volleys of arrows, and retreated before the heavily armored knights could respond. This was death by 1,000 cuts. The Crusaders, burdened by their heavy armor and marching on foot, slowed to a crawl under the brutal, unforgiving July sun. As if the heat and the constant harassment weren't enough, Saladin had sent detachments ahead. They systematically poisoned or filled in the wells along the Crusaders' path and set fire to the dry scrub and grass. The smoke choked the marching soldiers, and the landscape ahead became a blackened, barren wasteland. The Crusaders weren't just marching towards an enemy army. They were marching into a furnace, a man-made hell. By the end of the day, the Crusader army was a ghost of its former self. They were utterly exhausted, tormented by a thirst that drove men to madness, and their morale was shattered. They could march no further. They were forced to make camp on a dry, rocky plateau, flanked by two hills known as the Horns of Hattin. It was a position with no water, no escape, and no hope. As they set up their desperate camp, they looked out and saw they were completely encircled by Saladin's forces. The trap was now fully sprung. As darkness fell, the true psychological warfare began. Saladin ordered his men to light massive bonfires all around the Crusader encampment. The smoke and the heat wafted over the Christian soldiers, further choking their parched throats. All night long the hills echoed with the sounds of Saladin's army. They chanted prayers, beat drums, and sang songs of victory, their voices a constant torturous reminder of the Crusaders' hopeless situation. For the trapped Christians, it was a night of absolute torment. Their thirst became an all-consuming agony. Contemporary accounts, likely with some exaggeration, tell of men driven to such desperation that they drank their own urine and even slit the veins of their horses to drink the blood, sacrificing their last hope of mobility for a momentary relief. By the time the sun began to rise, the spirit of the Crusader army was utterly broken. The battle for their minds and bodies had already been lost before the main clash of arms had even truly begun. As the first rays of the dawn sun on July 4th illuminated the hellish scene, the final act of this tragedy began. The Christian foot soldiers, the infantry, were the first to break. Maddened by thirst and despair, they abandoned their posts, defying their commander's orders. They saw a flicker of hope, or perhaps just an escape from the smoke, and fled up the slopes of the northern horn of Hattin. This single act of desperation sealed their doom. It separated the infantry from the knights, fatally splitting the Crusader army in two. From this high ground, they could only watch as their mounted comrades were destroyed below. Seeing the battle was lost, King Guy made a final, desperate gambit. He ordered a charge, a last, glorious push by the remaining knights to break the encirclement. It was the classic Crusader tactic, a thunderous charge of heavily armored cavalry that had won them many battles before. But Saladin was a master tactician. He had anticipated this. He ordered his men to open ranks, creating channels for the charging knights to pass through. Once inside, the trap closed again. The knights were swarmed from all sides. Their horses were targeted and killed, and they were pulled from their saddles. Isolated, now on foot, and dying of thirst under the relentless sun, the very heart of the Crusader army was systematically annihilated. In the chaos, the ultimate symbol of their faith and the centerpiece of their army, a relic believed to be a piece of the true cross, was captured. Its loss was a devastating blow, a sign from God that they had been abandoned. The battle was over. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a complete and total annihilation. The greatest army the Kingdom of Jerusalem had ever assembled had ceased to exist. In the aftermath of his stunning victory, Saladin demonstrated the two sides of his legendary character: unyielding ruthlessness and profound chivalry. As promised, he dealt with Reynald of Chatillon personally. The captured Crusader leaders were brought to his tent. Saladin offered a cup of iced water to the exhausted King Guy, a traditional Arab gesture of hospitality and safety. When Guy passed the cup to Reynald, Saladin coolly stated that the king had given him the water, not he. The oath he had sworn was sacred. After offering Reynald a chance to convert, which the defiant baron refused, Saladin drew his sword and beheaded him, fulfilling his vow. Yet in the very next moment, he turned to King Guy and reassured him, "It is not the custom of kings to kill kings." Guy was treated with respect and honor, a display of chivalry that would become a cornerstone of Saladin's legend, even among his enemies in Europe. With the Crusader army utterly destroyed at Hattin, the path to Jerusalem was now wide open. The kingdom's castles and cities were left without defenders. They fell one by one like dominoes. Just 3 months after the battle, Saladin stood before the gates of Jerusalem. But unlike the Crusader conquest in 1099, which ended in a horrific massacre of the city's inhabitants, Saladin's reclamation was a masterpiece of statesmanship. He negotiated the city's surrender, allowing the Christian inhabitants to ransom themselves and leave safely. This merciful act stood in stark contrast to the brutality of the First Crusade, and was the direct and glorious consequence of his tactical masterpiece here, at the Horns of Hattin. The Battle of Hattin remains one of the most studied battles in military history, a timeless and brutal lesson in the art of war. It's a perfect case study on the overwhelming power of terrain and environment. Saladin didn't just defeat the Crusader army with soldiers. He defeated them with the sun, with thirst, with the very land itself. It underscores the critical importance of logistics. The Crusaders left their water and supplies, while Saladin controlled all the resources, turning the Crusaders' own needs into weapons against them. Finally, it demonstrates the devastating effect of morale. By the morning of the battle, the Crusader army was already psychologically defeated, their will to fight evaporated by a night of torment. Hattin was the day a brilliant and disciplined commander, leading a united Islamic force, turned the tables on the Crusaders and achieved what had once seemed impossible. In doing so, Saladin didn't just win a battle, he changed the course of history, reshaping the map of the Middle East for centuries to come. So, what do you think of Saladin's strategy? Was it pure genius, or were the Crusaders just incredibly foolish? Could they have done anything differently to win? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love reading your analysis of these incredible historical events. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next chapter of our series on the Crusades. We'll be looking at how Europe responded to this catastrophe and how Richard the Lionheart would arrive to try and take it all back. Thanks for watching.